Welcome to one of the most unsettling stories ever recorded in the Ozark Mountains. Before we dive in, drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from and what time of day or night you're hearing this. It's always fascinating to know how far and wide these stories travel. The year was 1866, and America was still stitching itself back together after the Civil War. The Ozarks, with their endless forests and shadowed valleys, were a haven for those looking to disappear, some running from the law, others from their past, and a few from their own minds. In Washington County, Arkansas, near a bend of the White River, stood a lonely cabin that would later earn a chilling name, the Boyle Place. In April 1869, a land surveyor named Jeremiah Hawkins ventured into the hollow while mapping for a possible railroad line. What he found there would mark him for life. The cabin looked long abandoned, overgrown with weeds, its chimney cold despite the spring chill. Hawkins wrote in his field journal that curiosity, not fear, drove him to approach. He called out, but got no answer, then stepped inside to record the structure. What he saw would haunt him forever. The cabin's interior seemed frozen in time, as if the people inside had simply vanished mid-meal. A table was set for three with dried scraps of food still on the plates. A pot hung cold over the fireplace. A rocking chair near the window swayed gently in the breeze. But when Hawkins entered the back room, he fled in panic, leaving his equipment behind and riding straight to Fayetteville to alert Sheriff Thomas Muldrow. In the report filed on April 17, 1869, later stored in the Washington County Archives until its mysterious removal in 1951, Sheriff Muldrow described the scene with professional restraint that barely masked his horror. The back room appeared to be a workshop, lined with shelves of glass jars, each containing preserved specimens of an unsettling kind. A large wooden table in the center was stained dark. Dozens of handwritten journals sat stacked neatly in the corner. Muldrow ordered the journals collected and the cabin sealed. Within days, the writings revealed a grim tale, the story of Tobias Boyle, a man broken by war and consumed by obsession. County records showed that Boyle bought the land in 1866, paying in gold and keeping to himself. He arrived with a woman who neighbors described as pale and frightened, and a third companion, a man whose identity was never confirmed. The journals, written from late 1866 through early 1869, began innocently enough notes on hunting, building, and farming. But soon the tone changed. Boyle, a former Confederate surgeon, wrote about continuing his research free from the ignorance of military command. The nature of that research was never made public. Parts of the journals were deemed too disturbing and sealed by court order. Those who read them claimed they contained records of experiments unlike anything known to medicine at the time. The woman, referred to only as E, grew increasingly fearful in his writings, her presence fading with each entry. The most haunting detail, though, wasn't what they found, but what they didn't. The cabin clearly held 3 occupants, yet only 2 sets of belongings were discovered. The question of who the third person was and what happened to them has never been answered. The final entry in Tobias Boyle's journal, dated February 22, 1869, contained just one cryptic statement: "The patience of observation must yield to the necessity of direct participation. E refuses to acknowledge the potential. Tomorrow, all will be clarified." After that silence, no more entries. No one ever saw the 3 residents of the Boyle cabin again. When authorities searched the property, they found no bodies, no signs of struggle, only the strange remnants of whatever had taken place there. Despite extensive searches across the nearby woods, not a single trace of the occupants was ever found. Records confirmed that Tobias Boyle had once served as a field surgeon with the 3rd Arkansas Infantry during the Civil War. But his whereabouts between the war's end and his appearance in the Ozarks were completely unknown. The woman he referred to as E in his writings could not be identified, and the identity of the third companion remains a mystery. Investigators initially suspected foul play, theorizing that Boyle might have murdered the others before fleeing. But the scene inside the cabin contradicted that idea. The neatly set table for three, as if dinner had just been interrupted, pointed instead to a sudden and unexplained disappearance. Deputy James Calloway wrote in his personal diary that as he neared the cabin, a heaviness seemed to hang in the air, as though the place itself resisted our approach. Several searchers described feeling the same thing, an invisible pressure, an unease that made it hard to breathe. One man refused to cross the threshold entirely, insisting that the air pushes back. Sheriff Muldrow dismissed these claims as superstition. Yet nearly everyone who visited the site in later years described a similar sensation. Stranger still, the forest around the cabin was unnaturally still. Within 100 yards of the structure, there were no animal tracks, no bird song, just silence. For years, the case remained a local ghost story, destined to fade into folklore, until 1887, when Dr. William Hawthorne, a physician and historian from St. Louis, stumbled upon references to the case while researching Civil War medicine. Intrigued, he traveled to Fayetteville to review the remaining evidence. The cabin by then had been torn down by locals who swore it brought misfortune, and most of the preserved specimens had been destroyed by court order. Only fragments of Boyle's journals remained redacted and brittle, yet still deeply unsettling. Dr. Hawthorne's notes later published in the Bauta Journal of Historical Medicine. In 1912, painted a portrait of a man consumed by his own curiosity. Boyle's writings revealed an obsession with the mystery of human endurance. He had seen men survive catastrophic wounds while others died from injuries that seemed trivial. The conventional understanding of human vitality is fundamentally flawed, he wrote. Hawthorne observed that Boyle's early entries were detached and methodical, but as the months passed, his tone grew feverish. He began writing about what he called the partitioning of awareness, theorizing that human consciousness could exist in separate divisible parts, and that these fragments could be isolated or preserved under the right conditions. Boyle described soldiers who, despite mortal wounds, remained lucid for impossible lengths of time, evidence. He believed that consciousness was not singular, but composite. Hawthorne's own research uncovered troubling details from Boyle's military service. Several patients under Boyle's care had exhibited strange symptoms after surgery, responsive but vacant, moving and obeying commands without any sign of recognition or will. One nurse described a soldier who was awake without self. Such accounts were dismissed at the time as the byproduct of wartime trauma. Yet pieced together, they hinted at something far more disturbing. The mystery of Boyle's companions deepened when Hawthorne discovered hospital records from Richmond in 1864, mentioning a Dr. Boyle and a nurse named Ellen M. Witnesses described the two as unusually close, and one officer's letter mentioned their after-hours experiments conducted once senior surgeons had retired. Soon after, both disappeared from official records. A notation in Boyle's military file revealed a brief reassignment late in the war to a classified medical research unit tasked with experimental surgery. The records from that unit were destroyed when Richmond burned, but the timing aligned precisely with Ellen's disappearance. Whether she followed him willingly or became one of his subjects was a question that history would never answer. The identity of the third resident of the Boyle Cabin remained a complete mystery, fueling rumors that spread through Washington County for years. Some locals claimed the third person was an escaped prisoner. Others whispered that he was one of Boyle's patients, brought there for experiments that went too far. A few even believed he was a relative, someone bound to the doctor by blood or guilt. Whatever the truth, this nameless figure would become the key to a far darker revelation that surfaced decades later. After returning to St. Louis, Dr. William Hawthorne compiled his research into a manuscript titled Unorthodox Medical Practices in the Late War. One chapter focused entirely on the Boyle case. But before publication, Hawthorne received a stern warning from the Washington County Clerk, advising that spreading unfounded and sensational claims about the matter could lead to legal action for disturbing public peace. Reluctantly, Hawthorne removed the chapter and sealed his notes, which remained hidden among his papers until his death in 1916. In the years that followed, the land where the Boyle Cabin once stood changed owners several times, but was never developed. Locals claimed crops planted nearby withered without explanation, and livestock refused to graze anywhere near the hollow. By the turn of the century, the place had earned a reputation for being cursed abandoned to the creeping forest and whispered about only in hushed tones. The story might have ended there, if not for the floods of June 1923. Torrential rain swept through the White River Valley, reshaping the land and exposing long-buried secrets. On the old Boyle property, a limestone sinkhole opened, revealing the mouth of a hidden cave beneath where the cabin once stood. The property's owner, a farmer named Josiah Miller, contacted authorities after his dog returned from the opening carrying what appeared to be a human bone. When county officials arrived to investigate, they uncovered a chamber deep within the earth, a space that showed clear signs of human activity. Stone shelves had been carved into the walls, and a large table of rough stone stood at the center, surrounded by rusted surgical instruments. Even more unsettling were the markings covering the limestone walls, intricate anatomical drawings, spirals, and symbols resembling medical notations, but warped and alien, depicting something not entirely human. No full skeletons were found, only scattered bone fragments. Yet investigators noticed something peculiar. The cave appeared to have been sealed from within. Heavy stones had been stacked into a makeshift barricade some distance from the entrance, suggesting that whoever had been down there had intentionally shut themselves inside, long before the sinkhole exposed it again. Authorities quickly resealed the site, citing the unstable ground as a safety hazard. The Fayetteville Democrat ran a short piece on June 14, 1923, mentioning only unusual formations found on the old Boyle property and that the area had been closed to the public. Before the cave was sealed, however, County Coroner Dr. Franklin Pierce examined the bone fragments. His unpublished report described findings that were deeply troubling. Several bones bore clean, deliberate cuts, consistent with surgical tools, while others showed evidence of drilling and the insertion of foreign materials. Most disturbing of all, some fragments appeared fused with a strange metallic alloy, melded in such a way that the process must have occurred while the tissue was still alive. Dr. Pierce urged that the remains be sent to a university for further study, noting that they were human in form, but altered beyond recognition. Instead, the county judge William Harrison, whose uncle had served with Boyle in the Confederate Army, ordered the remains destroyed, citing concerns of desecration. Officially, the case was closed. But in 1945, a historian named Dr. Margaret Holcomb uncovered the long-sealed records while researching Civil War medical practices. Her findings, published in the Journal of Historical Appalachian Studies, reignited the mystery. Holcomb's review of military archives showed that Tobias Boyle had twice been reprimanded for performing unauthorized surgeries on wounded soldiers. One Confederate inspector's report noted that Boyle had developed unorthodox theories about human awareness during extreme physical trauma and had begun experimenting with methods to sustain or extend consciousness. Though the inspector recommended his dismissal, the Confederacy's desperate shortage of doctors kept him in service. Holcomb also found a letter that might shed light on the human side of the story. A letter written in March 1865 by a nurse named Ellen Morrison, believed to be the same E from Boyle's journals. Addressed to her sister in Baltimore, the letter revealed growing fear and loyalty in equal measure. His interests have shifted from healing to something I cannot comprehend, she wrote. He speaks of thresholds between states of being, of preserving awareness beyond what nature allows. I fear the war has broken his mind, yet I cannot abandon him after all we have endured. Morrison's letter also mentioned a patient identified only as Subject 11, a soldier with a severe head wound who had become the focus of Boyle's obsessive study. He watches him constantly, she wrote, recording every motion, every flicker of the eyes, every whisper of thought. It was the last known correspondence from Ellen Morrison. After that, like the others connected to Boyle, she vanished from history, leaving behind only her letter, her initials, and the lingering question of what exactly took place beneath the hills of the Ozarks. Ellen Morrison's final letter offered a chilling glimpse into the unraveling mind of Dr. Tobias Boyle. Last night, she wrote, I found him speaking to the patient about consciousness residing in compartments, how a properly prepared mind might be divided like segments of an orange, each maintaining its own awareness. When I entered, he stopped speaking. But his eyes, God help me, his eyes burned with an excitement I have not seen since before Antietam. Dr. Margaret Holcomb later theorized that Ellen was the very E mentioned throughout Boyle's journals, and that the two had fled west after the war to continue his increasingly unhinged experiments far from the scrutiny of military oversight. More disturbingly, Holcomb proposed that Subject 11, the soldier Ellen referenced, was likely the third resident of the infamous cabin Boyle's final living experiment. Her research led her to the records of Chimborazo Hospital in Richmond, where Boyle had been stationed in early 1865. There she uncovered an entry for a patient listed only as numbered 11, a soldier admitted with a severe head wound who remained physically responsive but mentally absent. On February 12, 1865, the patient was transferred to a special research ward, after which his record abruptly ended. The date matched Boyle's reassignment to a secret medical unit, lending disturbing weight to the theory that he had taken the patient with him, perhaps unwillingly, to continue his work in secret. The most haunting revelation in Holcomb's research came from an obscure 1889 interview with Jeremiah Hawkins, the surveyor who had first discovered the cabin 20 years earlier. Near the end of his life, Hawkins finally spoke to a local historian, breaking decades of silence. The jars contained things that had no right to be preserved, he said. They looked human, but not quite. Twisted, altered. And on the table there was a contraption of brass and wood, fitted with straps as if meant to hold a man still. But the drawings, those I can never forget. According to Hawkins, the cabin's back room was covered in sketches of the human body, but not in any medical sense he recognized. They divided the body not by muscle or bone, he recalled, but as if the man believed he could slice the soul itself. He described journal pages that never appeared in the official report entries, where Boyle wrote about consciousness as something divisible, capable of being separated and contained. In one passage, Boyle described isolating awareness in a limb, independent of the mind, and in another, the transference of those fragments into other vessels. His final goal, Hawkins claimed, was to achieve what Boyle called distributed consciousness, a single mind spread across multiple bodies. When asked why he never revealed this sooner, Hawkins sighed. I did, he said. I told Sheriff Muldrow everything. The next day, he told me certain details were to be left out, said they'd cause hysteria. He warned me that repeating such things could get me charged with public disturbance. So I stayed quiet. Holcomb's paper, published in a small academic journal in 1945, caused a brief stir among historians, but quickly faded from public attention. The Washington County Historical Society distanced itself from her findings. And by 1951, many original documents from the case, including Hawkins's testimony and Boyle's remaining journals, were quietly removed from the archives under the guise of preservation. The following year, Holcomb accepted a university position back east and never wrote about the case again. Yet a final twist remained. After Holcomb's death in 1978, her personal papers were donated to her university, among them a sealed envelope marked with strict instructions, not to be opened until the year 2025. To this day, the envelope remains unopened, its contents a mystery. The Boyle case might have finally slipped into obscurity, but in 1967, nearly a century after the cabin's discovery, construction crews surveying for a new highway through Washington County stumbled upon something buried deep beneath the soil of the old Boyle property. What they found would reignite one of the darkest legends in the history of the Ozark Mountains. When engineers returned to the old Boyle property in 1967 to survey for the new highway, they discovered that the cave beneath the site was far larger than anyone had imagined. The network of tunnels and chambers extended nearly a quarter-mile into the hillside, and the evidence suggested it had been used by humans long before Tobias Boyle arrived there. Carbon dating of artifacts recovered from the deeper chambers indicated human activity as early as the first decade of the 1800s, long before the Civil War, implying that Boyle may have deliberately chosen the site for its unique underground features rather than by coincidence. The survey, led by geologist Dr. Howard Ramsey, revealed a disturbing level of modification within the cave system. Walls bore chisel marks where the rock had been deliberately expanded, while other areas had been carefully sealed off with stone. The most unsettling detail was the discovery of a primitive but effective ventilation system. Thin shafts bored through the limestone to the surface, allowing air to circulate throughout the subterranean complex. Whoever built it had done so with precision and purpose. In the deepest chamber, accessible only by crawling through a narrow passage, the team found what Ramsey described as a subterranean workshop. Carved stone tables stood along the walls, each with shallow channels leading into basins carved from the floor as if designed to drain or collect fluids. The markings covering the chamber's walls were unlike anything the team had ever encountered. A blend of anatomical sketches and what looked eerily like electrical circuit diagrams, merging biological and mechanical imagery in ways that defied logic. Ramsey's report noted that the designs appeared to follow a coherent system of notation, suggesting a symbolic language bridging physiology and machinery. Photographs of the markings were later examined by linguists and cryptographers who agreed they represented a structured code, but no one could decipher its meaning. Rusted fragments of metal, possibly surgical instruments, were found embedded in the cave floor, corroded beyond recognition. Among these remnants, the team made one final, deeply unsettling discovery. Wedged into a crevice near the far wall was a small leather-bound notebook, its pages water-damaged but still partially legible. The handwriting was delicate looping and consistent with other samples believed to belong to Ellen Morrison. Most of the entries had been ruined by moisture and time. But one passage dated January 1868 remained readable. T believes he has identified the moment when awareness separates from physical form. He speaks of capturing this instant, of extending it indefinitely. I can no longer reconcile these pursuits with the man of healing I once knew. And yet the subject shows no outward distress. He responds, he breathes, he lives. Perhaps there is truth in what T suggests, that what we perceive as a single consciousness may in fact be divisible. Another fragment, nearly lost to decay, hinted at the transformation of the cave itself. T has discovered that the limestone possesses unusual properties. He claims it resonates with awareness, that it responds to the consciousness within it. The chambers he selects for each phase of his work are chosen according to some acoustic principle he refuses to fully explain. Dr. Ramsey's report concluded with an observation that echoed through every account of the case. Whatever Tobias Boyle had been attempting in those underground chambers, it was not simple experimentation. It was the deliberate construction of something that blurred the line between life, death, and the human mind itself. Ellen Morrison's final writings describe strange and unsettling phenomena deep within the cave. I have observed that sounds behave strangely in certain areas, she noted. Voices echo in impossible ways, as though coming from multiple directions at once. The subject she mentioned, presumably the third resident of the cabin, remained unidentified. But her tone left little doubt that the person was not a willing participant in Boyle's ongoing experiments. The final entry, dated February 1869, and nearly destroyed by water damage, contained only a fragmented confession. Cannot continue as witness to this. The chamber below grows with his obsession. Last night he spoke of the ultimate separation, dividing his own consciousness as final proof of his theory. I fear what he intends for us all when the rest was lost. That was the last known trace of Ellen Morrison. The journal was transferred to the University of Arkansas archives shortly after its discovery, only to disappear in 1968 during a supposed collection reorganization. Its current whereabouts remain unknown. Dr. Ramsey's team, meanwhile, unearthed artifacts that deepen the mystery. Chief among them was a partially intact mechanism constructed of brass wood and a strange metallic alloy not typically found in 19th century materials. Roughly the size of a human head, it was made of interlocking rings, designed to rotate independently, each studded with small crystalline nodes set at precise intervals. Engineers speculated that it might have been intended to produce electromagnetic fields or capture certain frequencies, but no definitive explanation was ever reached. Then came the most disturbing find: human remains embedded within the limestone walls of the cave itself. Unlike the scattered fragments found in 1923, these remains appeared intentionally placed, as if absorbed into the living rock. Ramsey recorded one chilling example in his notes. A human hand, perfectly preserved, protruding from the wall. The stone around it appears to have grown over the flesh. Attempts to remove it failed. It was as though bone, tissue, and mineral had fused into one. As Ramsey's discoveries filtered into public awareness, they reignited local legends that had circulated for nearly a century. In 1962, journalist Martin Clyde collected these oral histories for his book, Shadows of the Ozarks. Interviewing elderly residents of Washington County, Clyde uncovered stories passed down from parents and grandparents who had lived near the Boyle property after the Civil War. Several spoke of a strange man who occasionally emerged from the woods to trade for supplies in distant settlements. He never spoke, communicating only through written notes, and kept his head and face wrapped in heavy bandages. Locals assumed he was a wounded veteran, but witnesses described something far more unnerving. Agnes Thornton, aged 94 at the time of her interview, recalled her father's words. He said when the bandages slipped, it wasn't like looking at an injured man. It was like looking at something incomplete, as though parts that should have been there were missing. Yet he moved and breathed and lived all the same. Another witness, James Wilson, shared his grandfather's story from 1871. Grandpa was out hunting near Bear Creek, he said. He saw a man sitting dead still beside a fallen tree. When he called out, the man turned his head slow, deliberate. Grandpa said his movements were too smooth, too exact, like clockwork. And what skin showed beneath the bandages seemed to shift as though it hadn't settled right. These accounts suggested the impossible that one of the Boyle Cabin's residents, perhaps the mysterious third subject, had survived. If true, it meant that Tobias Boyle's experiments hadn't merely failed or vanished into madness. They had worked in some grotesque and partial way. Something human, or once human, had walked out of that hollow. Clyde's book included one final account that added yet another layer of dread. Sarah Collins, daughter of a man who had been part of the original search party in 1869, told of strange markings found on trees surrounding the Boyle property. Her father described them as resembling anatomical diagrams, the same kind later discovered carved into the cave walls. But there was one crucial difference: the markings appeared to have been carved from the inside of the wood outward, as though something had pressed its way through from within. When archaeologists revisited the site in 1967, they found evidence lending weight to these old tales. Scattered through the forest were makeshift shelters fashioned from bark stones and scavenged materials. Primitive dwellings suggesting that someone or something had lived in the area long after the cabin was abandoned. Whatever had emerged from that place in February 1869 had not vanished entirely. It had lingered in the Ozark woods for years, perhaps decades, half remembered by locals, feared by children, and whispered about in the dark as the man who wasn't whole. The archaeological surveys conducted in 1967 revealed that someone or something had continued to inhabit the woods surrounding the old Boyle property long after the cabin's disappearance. Carbon dating of ash deposits, tools, and discarded materials from crude shelters indicated occupation until roughly 1880, when all traces of human activity abruptly ended. The researchers also found trees displaying grotesque deformities and internal scarring that matched the strange markings described in local folklore. When these trees were cut open, their internal grain patterns appeared to have been reshaped from within. A biologist studying the samples concluded that the wood's cellular structure had been reorganized in deliberate repeating patterns, as if the trees had somehow been instructed or compelled to grow according to an unnatural design. The most haunting discovery came from a small metal box buried beneath one of the forest shelters. Inside was a single document written on fragile yellowed paper, dated 1878. A confession or final testament, whose authenticity remains the subject of fierce academic debate. The letter began with the line, "I, who write these words, am not as I once was." The handwriting matched neither Tobias Boyle's nor Ellen Morrison's, leading investigators to speculate that it might have been written by the elusive third occupant of the cabin. The writer's words were fragmented, wavering between lucidity and madness. What remains of my original self diminishes with each passing season, while that which Boyle introduced grows stronger. The text described a horrific procedure conducted in the cave beneath the cabin, an experiment in which Boyle allegedly succeeded in dividing human consciousness itself. The writer claimed to have experienced the splitting of awareness, a separation of the mind into independent fragments, each perceiving the world from a different vantage. Ellen fled when she understood what had been done. The author wrote, she took with her the portion of Boyle that remained human. What was left of him pursued us, driven by the shattered pieces of a mind that could no longer be whole. I remained neither what I was nor what he made me. The experiment succeeded and failed at once. As the confession continued, its tone disintegrated into something far stranger. The writer described a spreading awareness, the resonance of divided consciousness within the limestone caves and into the forest itself. The trees hear my thoughts. One line read, "The forest breathes with me. I see through its leaves, and it listens through my ears. Division has become multiplication. The final paragraph ended abruptly, the ink smeared as if written in haste. I write this, knowing it will be my last communication. The division grows unstable. Soon the fragments will collapse into one another, and what emerges will not remember what it once was. Perhaps this is Boyle's final triumph, the birth of a new kind of consciousness, born from the deliberate fracturing of three into something other. The document was transferred to the University of Arkansas archives, but was quietly removed from the collection in 1969 under unexplained circumstances. Its current location remains unknown. Debate over its authenticity has persisted among the few scholars aware of its existence. Some regard it as a hoax crafted by locals eager to keep the legend of Tobias Boyle alive. Others, including Dr. Allison Chambers, a neuropsychologist, who examined the text in 1969, found it chillingly plausible. Chambers noted that the writing displayed cognitive patterns consistent with an individual experiencing simultaneous multiple viewpoints, a phenomenon occasionally observed in rare cases of dissociative or split consciousness. If genuine, she wrote, the document represents a mind attempting to integrate several coexisting streams of awareness. It is not merely madness, it is multiplicity. Supporting the document's potential authenticity were the physical remains unearthed during the 1967 excavations. Bone fragments retrieved from the cave exhibited clean circular drill marks and incisions, far more precise than anything achievable with 19th century surgical tools. Embedded within several specimens were traces of an unknown metallic alloy, fused directly with the bone tissue, suggesting an early and impossible attempt at biological-mechanical integration. Metallurgical analysis confirmed that the material contained elements uncommon in the era's technology, including microscopic crystalline structures that seemed engineered rather than accidental. These discoveries forced even the most skeptical researchers to acknowledge that something extraordinary, something well beyond the boundaries of 19th century medicine, had taken place beneath the Ozark Hills. Whether Tobias Boyle had truly fractured consciousness or simply destroyed himself and those around him in pursuit of an impossible vision, the evidence left behind suggested that the experiment had not ended with his death. Something of it, some echo of divided awareness, appeared to have lingered in the limestone in the forest, and perhaps even in the very air that once carried his voice. Metallurgical analysis of the alloy recovered from the cave yielded results that defied explanation. Conducted by Dr. Kenneth Foster at the University of Arkansas in 1967, the study revealed a mixture of ordinary 19th century metals, copper, iron, and traces of tin, but also minute quantities of elements that would not be identified by science until decades later. Foster's report described the alloy's structure as purposefully engineered to interface with organic material, a statement that stunned his colleagues. Under microscopic examination, the junctions where metal met bone showed such precise integration that the two appeared to have grown together, the boundary between them smooth at a cellular level. The degree of precision suggests not improvisation, but design, Foster wrote, concluding that whoever had made the device possessed an understanding of biometallic interaction, at least a century ahead of its time. The geological survey team studying the surrounding limestone discovered anomalies equally strange. The cave's mineral formations displayed crystalline patterns and electromagnetic responses wholly unlike natural limestone deposits. Certain chambers seemed to resonate faintly with low-frequency vibrations, measurable only with sensitive equipment. When sound tests were conducted, the cave produced acoustic behavior that violated conventional physics. A whisper uttered in one passage would reappear amplified and clarified in another chamber 100 feet away, while nearby corridors swallowed even the loudest noises in total silence. Dr. Howard Ramsey, the lead geologist, described the experience as standing inside a living instrument tuned to frequencies we cannot yet comprehend. Still more troubling was the presence of organic material fused directly into the stone itself. Samples extracted from the cave walls contained human cellular components, epidermal and connective tissues, preserved in a partially mineralized state. Dr. Elizabeth Warner, the biologist on the team, described the samples as existing in a liminal phase between living tissue and geological formation, as if the rock had absorbed and stabilized human material. Her field notes speculated that the process might have been the result of chemical interaction or environmental conditions unique to the cave. But she admitted that the integration appears intentional. By 1968, mounting controversy and growing unease among university officials led to the quiet closure of the investigation. A committee concluded that the evidence, though remarkable, was too fragmentary to support credible scientific conclusions. The cave entrance was sealed under the guise of highway safety, and the recovered artifacts were distributed among multiple institutions, ensuring that no single researcher could reassemble the full picture. The Boyle case was officially closed, yet the legend refused to die. Even after the cave was buried under concrete and asphalt, residents of Washington County continued to whisper about strange occurrences near the old Boyle property. Locals spoke of faint metallic sounds echoing through the forest on still nights, tones described as neither mechanical nor human. Hikers occasionally stumbled upon rough stone shelters deep in the woods, seemingly abandoned, yet bearing signs of recent use. Some visitors reported a sudden disorientation, a sense of being observed from several points at once, or of seeing through their own eyes from a distance. The most unsettling reports came from construction workers who helped seal the cave in 1968. Several swore they heard a steady tapping emanating from behind the concrete barriers, a deliberate rhythm. One worker, a former military radio operator, later insisted that the pattern matched Morse code spelling a single phrase, "Division incomplete." In the years that followed, strange phenomena continued to plague the area. Campers reported compasses spinning aimlessly, radios producing bursts of static that coalesced into faint human voices, and batteries draining within minutes. Visitors described sensations of detachment of thought, slipping beyond their own minds, as if their awareness had been briefly shared or divided. By the 1980s, scientists conducting botanical studies of the forest noticed anomalies in the local vegetation. Trees near the former cabin site grew in unnerving symmetry, twinned deformities mirroring one another across distances of several hundred yards. Certain plant species exhibited what researchers called non-local response patterns, reacting to stimuli in separate locations as if connected by an invisible network. To this day, hikers who wander too close to the old Boyle Hollow sometimes speak of hearing faint, overlapping whispers in the wind, voices echoing from multiple directions, repeating a single phrase in the rhythm of a pulse. Division incomplete. By 1969, exactly 100 years after Jeremiah Hawkins stumbled upon the abandoned Boyle Cabin, Dr. James Wilford stepped forward with what he believed was the most reasonable, reality-grounded interpretation of the case. After reviewing the scattered records, Wilford concluded that Tobias Boyle had likely been suffering from a dangerous combination of severe post-traumatic stress and mercury poisoning, a common hazard for Civil War surgeons who routinely use the element in treatments and disinfectants. In Wilford's view, Boyle's increasingly bizarre writings and experiments were the result of psychosis fueled by trauma, chemical exposure, and battlefield phenomena, particularly the uncanny moments when mortally wounded soldiers would remain momentarily animate, which may have inspired Boyle's ideas about divided consciousness. Under this interpretation, Ellen Morrison and the unnamed third resident were either victims or complicit participants swept into Boyle's delusions. But Wilford's explanation left glaring holes. It did not address the extraordinary engineering of the cave system. the ventilation shaft's acoustically tuned chambers and chiseled expansions, nor the surgically precise modifications to the bone fragments recovered from the cave. And it could not explain the metallurgical analyses confirming that the strange alloy embedded in some bones contained trace elements unknown to science until the early 20th century. Even more unsettling records from the 1870s documented at least 3 search parties combing the woods near the Boyle property for missing hunters, each reporting encounters with a figure moving with unnatural fluidity. In every case, the pursuers experienced sudden disorientation, a loss of bearings that prevented them from following, as though the landscape itself were working to repel them. The mystery deepened when the people who tried to investigate the case themselves began to exhibit troubling patterns. Dr. Margaret Holcomb's promising career ended abruptly in 1952, after a 3-month hospitalization for what records called acute nervous exhaustion. Her private letters from this period, found among her papers after her death, contained alarming confessions of thoughts that do not feel like my own, and the sensation of observing myself from outside. Dr. Howard Ramsey, who led the 1967 geological survey that uncovered the deepest chambers of the cave, resigned shortly after filing his report and moved to a remote area of Oregon where he lived in near isolation until his death in 1979. His personal journals, obtained by a nephew in 1998, revealed a fixation on the integration of consciousness across biological and mineral substrates, and included sketches eerily similar to the diagrams found in the cave, even though Ramsey reportedly never saw the originals again. Historian Thomas Blackwood attempted a comprehensive account of the Boyle case for his doctoral dissertation in 1975. But after 6 months of research, he abandoned the project, writing to his advisor, "I cannot escape the sensation that the more I investigate this matter, the more it investigates me in return. I find myself thinking thoughts that seem to originate elsewhere, as though the very act of focusing on the Boyle case has opened channels of influence I cannot control." Blackwood never again published on Boyle or the Ozark discoveries. When contacted by a journalist in 1992, he sent only a short note. "Some doors once opened cannot be fully closed again. The Boyle matter is best left undisturbed." He died in 2005, never revisiting the topic. This repeating pattern researchers drawn to the Boyle case only to withdraw under mysterious psychological strain eventually became its own subject of study. In 1998, psychologist Dr. Rebecca Lane proposed that the Boyle materials represented a kind of mimetic contagion. Boyle's writings on divided consciousness, she theorized, might function as a cognitive virus, restructuring the mental patterns of anyone who immersed themselves too deeply in them. The recurring dissociative episodes reported by investigators, she wrote, could be a learned neurological mimicry of the very phenomena Boyle claimed to pursue. Lane's paper was largely ignored by mainstream academia, and she herself vanished from the field after 2001. Her current whereabouts are unknown. That same year, Dr. Marcus Winters published an article in the Journal of Parapsychological Research, proposing an even more radical explanation. Winters suggested that whatever Boyle had been doing in the cave system may have created a persistent field effect, embedding human awareness directly into the limestone and surrounding ecosystem. The integration of human cellular material with the mineral substrate, he wrote, suggests a deliberate attempt to extend consciousness beyond its conventional biological boundaries. If even partially successful, such an experiment might leave a residual awareness capable of influencing the perceptions of those who enter its sphere. Winters's ideas were dismissed by mainstream scientists, but embraced by those who had experienced strange phenomena near the old Boyle property. Local guides collected accounts of hikers who claimed to feel sudden surges of alien memories, thoughts not my own, or vivid sensations of watching themselves from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Even today, the forest surrounding the sealed cave remains a place of whispered legend. On still nights, some say faint metallic sounds drift through the trees. Neither fully human nor entirely mechanical, and compasses and electronics behave erratically. Visitors often report leaving with a nagging sense of having brought something back with them, an echo of awareness that doesn't quite belong. A century and a half after Tobias Boyle vanished, the mystery he left behind seems no closer to resolution, and perhaps, as Blackwood warned, it is best left undisturbed. One of the most chilling modern echoes of the Boyle legend came from a case documented by folklorist Patricia Reynolds in 1989. She interviewed a geology student who had camped near the sealed cave entrance during a university field trip. The student claimed he woke in the middle of the night with a sudden flawless understanding of how consciousness could be divided and distributed across multiple substrates. In a kind of trance, he filled several pages of his notebook with dense diagrams and equations, explaining the process despite having no background in neuroscience or advanced physics. When examined the next morning, the student's handwriting on those pages was markedly different from his usual script. Specialists who later reviewed the material described the concepts as theoretically sophisticated beyond the edge of current science, yet internally coherent. The student himself had no memory of producing the notes. Shortly afterward, he abandoned his studies and left the field entirely. Whatever the true nature of the Boyle Cabin and its occupants, the case remains one of the most disturbing and persistent legends in the history of the Ozarks. It is a story of isolation, obsession, and the catastrophic consequences of pushing knowledge beyond the limits of human comprehension. To this day, forestry surveys confirm that the hollow where the cabin once stood remains strangely devoid of wildlife. Hikers who unknowingly camp near the area often report unusually vivid dreams in which they experience themselves from multiple perspectives at once, just as the legends describe. The modern highway, constructed in 1968, passes within half a mile of the former Boyle property and has recorded an unusually high rate of single-vehicle accidents along that stretch. Traffic safety studies show that these incidents disproportionately involve drivers with no history of reckless behavior, suddenly veering off the road without explanation. Survivors frequently describe a brief dissociative episode or the sensation of foreign thoughts intruding into their awareness moments before losing control. Local folklore has woven the Boyle story into broader narratives about the Ozarks. Older residents still speak of places where sounds echo in impossible ways, where shadows move independently of their casters, and where visitors experience flashes of memory. They cannot explain vivid impressions of underground chambers or surgical procedures they have never actually seen. The final documented link to the Boyle case surfaced in 1962 at the Arkansas State Hospital in Little Rock. An elderly patient admitted under the name John Smith and diagnosed with advanced dementia began producing intricate technical drawings during moments of startling lucidity. These diagrams depicted a complex mechanism labeled consciousness division and storage, bearing an uncanny resemblance to the sketches reportedly recovered from the Boyle cave system in 1967. When asked about the drawings, the patient replied, "The separation was successful, but incomplete. Fragments remain. I am not one and not three. When the final division collapses, the truth of Boyle's work will be understood." 3 days later, the patient died. His autopsy stunned hospital staff. The examining pathologist reported unprecedented neural reorganization areas of the brain, where tissue had been systematically restructured according to an unknown principle. More shocking still, Dr. Robert Chambers, the attending physician, found small metallic objects embedded within the patient's brain tissue. These objects bore a striking resemblance to components of the device recovered from the Boyle cave system, and testing indicated they had been surgically implanted decades earlier, possibly as far back as the 1860s. Despite this, They showed no signs of rejection or deterioration. Dr. Chambers' final report ended with a grim conclusion. The patient's brain structure suggests a deliberate surgical reorganization inconsistent with any known medical procedure. More concerning is the evidence that this reorganization was performed while the subject remained conscious and cognitively active, implying a level of neurological understanding that exceeds even our current capabilities. The story of Tobias Boyle began as an unsettling footnote in post-Civil War Arkansas history. Over time, it has transformed into something far stranger, a web of legends, evidence, and modern phenomena that hint at an experiment whose effects may have outlived its creator. If the accounts are to be believed, the hollow where the cabin once stood is not simply haunted by a story, but by a field of influence, one born of divided minds, unfinished experiments, and the echo of a man who tried to break the boundaries of human consciousness itself. Whatever was done to the elderly patient at the Arkansas State Hospital remains one of the most disturbing mysteries in the long history of the Boyle case. The details of the surgical alterations discovered in his brain structures, unlike anything known to medical science, could suggest either an act of prolonged, unimaginable torture or a medical procedure centuries ahead of its time. Hospital administrators quickly sealed the patient's records and confiscated his drawings, which were never made available to researchers. His body was cremated before an independent autopsy could be arranged. Officially, nothing more was said. Yet the timing of his admission and the technical nature of the sketches he produced led many to speculate that the patient might have been the final survivor of whatever occurred at the Boyle Cabin, a living vessel, carrying within him the remnants of Tobias Boyle's horrifying legacy. 3 decades later, in 1994, a discovery at the Arkansas State Archives reignited the mystery. During renovations, a maintenance worker uncovered a sealed metal container hidden deep within a wall cavity. Inside were several fragile glass photographic plates dating back to around 1869. The images, though heavily degraded, appeared to document aspects of the original Boyle investigation that had been omitted from official records. Among them were photographs of the cabin's interior close-up shots of handwritten journals and several stark, unsettling images of the specimens preserved in glass jars. Experts identified the style and equipment as consistent with the work of Theodore Hardings, a photographer known to have worked with the Washington County Sheriff's Office during that period. The find drew brief national attention, but the plates' deteriorated condition made analysis difficult. Before they could be fully restored, the collection was transferred to a climate-controlled facility for preservation and promptly vanished from the archive's inventory. Their disappearance became yet another entry in the long pattern of missing or suppressed material connected to the case. Historian Professor Edgar Williams addressed this growing pattern in a 2001 paper on government information control. The Boyle materials, he wrote, exhibit the hallmark characteristics of deliberate suppression, not through destruction, but through gradual dispersion, bureaucratic reclassification, and convenient loss. Williams compared the handling of Boyle's records to the methods used to bury documentation from certain Cold War and wartime human experimentation programs. He suggested that the disturbing implications of Boyle's research might have prompted similar containment efforts long before such practices were formalized. Williams's theory gained unexpected credibility in 2012 when newly declassified Confederate and early federal medical documents surfaced in the National Archives. These revealed the existence of a covert Confederate Medical Research Division operating during the final years of the Civil War, known only as Department S. The unit reported directly to the Confederate Surgeon General and focused on methods to enhance soldier endurance, recovery, and survival from grievous wounds. Among the surviving records was a roster referencing a Dr. Boyle assigned temporarily to the program in late 1864. No further details of his work were preserved, but a post-war memorandum dated August 1865 mentioned the unique insights of Dr. B and recommended the continuation of his research under appropriate supervision. If the Dr. Boyle in those documents was indeed Tobias Boyle, the implications are profound. It suggests that his work in the Ozarks may not have been a solitary descent into madness, but part of a broader semi-official continuum of medical experimentation absorbed into post-war federal programs. The sophistication of the cave system beneath his cabin, the ventilation shafts, the acoustically engineered chambers, the precisely carved tables suddenly seems less like the product of one deranged man and more like the infrastructure of a funded research site. Whether Boyle fled the oversight of his superiors or was quietly relocated to continue his experiments in secrecy remains unknown. What is clear is that the resources and knowledge required to create the modifications found in the cave far exceeded those of a single rogue surgeon working alone in the wilderness. Today, the Ozark Mountains have long reclaimed the hollow where the Boyle Cabin once stood. To the casual hiker, it appears unremarkable, a tangle of overgrowth and limestone ridges. Yet those who venture too close speak of compasses spinning wildly, batteries draining without explanation, and faint mechanical whispers that seem to come from beneath the soil. Local guides refuse to lead visitors to the precise spot, claiming the air grows heavy there and that the forest itself seems to listen. Among locals, the saying persists, some places remember. And in the hollow once known as the Boyle Place, it is said that the memory never fades, it only waits. By the early 21st century, the Boyle case had become less a historical mystery than a living anomaly, something that seemed to resist explanation as actively as it resisted investigation. The few researchers who have tried to reopen the case over the decades have found themselves confronted with a familiar pattern: sealed files, redacted pages, and the quiet disappearance of critical evidence. Almost every primary source journal's photographs artifacts has been scattered, misplaced, or officially reclassified. What remains accessible is a mosaic of fragments, rumors, and the unsettling consistency of certain phenomena around the old Boyle property. The highway, constructed in 1968, passing less than a mile from the former cabin site, continues to be a statistical outlier for single-vehicle accidents. Official explanations cite sharp curves, wind shear, and driver fatigue. But internal safety reports, never meant for public release, acknowledge that the distribution of accidents along this stretch does not correlate with any standard risk factors. Survivors frequently describe the same momentary experience just before losing control. A sudden dissociation, an overwhelming sense of thoughts not my own, or a flicker of alien perception. Forest rangers overseeing the area have documented equally strange patterns in wildlife behavior. Animals avoid a roughly circular area centered on the former cabin site, a dead zone that sometimes shifts unpredictably. Motion-triggered cameras have captured deer, raccoons, and even black bears freezing at the perimeter, staring intently at something unseen before bolting away. Botanical surveys add another layer. Plants inside the zone grow faster, but fail to reproduce normally. Trees shoot up in symmetrical clusters, but produce fewer viable seeds. Flowering plants bloom with abnormal intensity, yet attract no pollinators. Soil analysis reveals elevated concentrations of deep earth minerals, usually found far below the surface, suggesting some ongoing exchange between the sealed cave system and the environment above it. In 2007, geologist Dr. Sandra Martinez undertook a ground-penetrating radar survey of the area as part of a study on Ozark karst formations. Her results astonished her colleagues. The imaging revealed that the cave system, sealed in 1968, had not remained static, but appeared to be expanding, with new chambers forming along radiating fracture lines. Such structural changes should take millennia, not decades. More troubling still, the radar showed chamber geometries inconsistent with natural limestone processes, Perfect spheres, smooth cylinders, and interconnected passages, suggesting deliberate design rather than random erosion. Martinez wrote in her preliminary paper, "This is not the slow work of water and time. This is construction." Her attempts to secure funding for a deeper investigation were quietly rejected, despite her reputation in the field. Review boards cited methodological concerns, but in private, Martinez confided to colleagues that she suspected institutional reluctance rather than scientific skepticism. Her graduate assistant, David Chen, began his own unofficial explorations. In 2009, he discovered a narrow fissure that seemed to connect to the sealed cave system. Using experimental remote sensing equipment of his own design, Chen claimed to have detected organized electrical activity within the underground chambers, regular patterns of weak electromagnetic pulses that, in his words, resembled nothing so much as the firing of neural networks. Chen's advisors strongly discouraged him from pursuing the matter, warning about the potential damage to his academic career. He soon left the geology program, entirely relocating to a remote area of Canada. His final email to colleagues in 2010 contained no data, no attachments, just one cryptic statement. I understand now what Boyle was attempting. The division of consciousness is not an end, but a beginning. Taken together, these accounts suggest a phenomenon that has shifted from a 19th century story of a rogue surgeon into something larger, an ongoing anomaly embedded in the landscape itself. The evidence points to three unsettling constants: the repeated loss or suppression of primary materials, the unexplained physical and biological anomalies near the old Boyle site, and the transformative effect on those who study it too deeply. Whether this is the residue of an unfinished experiment or simply the power of legend layered over coincidence, the result is the same: a place where even rational inquiry seems to fracture, where awareness once divided may still be trying to find its way back together. What emerges from properly structured fragmentation is not less than the original awareness, but exponentially more. Those were the last known words associated with David Chen before he vanished into Canada's Northern Territories. No further contact has been reported. Authorities briefly opened a missing person investigation, but closed it when they confirmed he had legally established residence in a remote settlement, living as a voluntary recluse. Former colleagues' attempts to reach him have all failed. Perhaps the most fitting conclusion to the story of the Boyle Cabin comes from Dr. Margaret Holcomb, written shortly before her academic career abruptly changed direction in 1952. The true horror of the Boyle case lies not in the possibility that his experiment succeeded, but in the implication that success and failure in such a context might be indistinguishable. If consciousness can indeed be divided, extracted, or transferred, then what remains of our understanding of human identity? It is a sentiment that feels as relevant now as it did then. Perhaps the most merciful outcome is that the evidence remains fragmented and incomplete, just like whatever may have emerged from that hollow in the winter of 1869. Today the hollow stands silent, reclaimed by the forest. Moss covers stones that once formed the cabin's foundation, and hikers pass by without realizing the ground beneath them holds one of the most disturbing chapters in Ozark history. Those who linger too long sometimes describe a heaviness in the air, a doubling of perception, or what one visitor put as the sensation of something watching me, watching myself. They move on quickly, carrying away nothing more than a vague unease, and perhaps if Tobias Boyle's theories held any truth, fragments of awareness not entirely their own. Neurologist Chrisame Henderson, reflecting on the case in a 2018 interview, offered a final perspective. Whether Boyle was a madman, a visionary, or simply a traumatized surgeon whose delusions have been magnified by decades of folklore, his story touches on primal fears about the fragility of identity. We cling to the notion that consciousness is unified and indivisible, because the alternative, that What we experience as a singular eye is merely a convenient illusion is fundamentally threatening. Perhaps that is why the case continues to disturb us. And so, the legend endures. Trees still grow in uncanny symmetry. Stones lie arranged in patterns echoing diagrams from Boyle's journals. On certain still nights, locals swear they hear a faint methodical tapping rising from deep beneath the sealed earth. A pulse in the dark, like a voice trying to complete a sentence cut short more than 150 years ago. Division incomplete indeed.